Of lovely ladies. Hello, lovely ladies. And about 3 of them want to learn a stack and wax. So I thought I'm going to do the trick where I do the teaching them while recording and everything. So we're coming to you from our village hall in the freezing, horrible, rainy coldness. So, yes, so the Deborah Moore, hello Deborah Moore, hello darling, is going to be our camera lady today. But we're going to first start off by looking at her fabric because she was corrupted by my good self to buy this. And if I'm not mistaken, this is a Dye Ford collection. Now this one you can see is a massif repeat of fabric. So I'm now going to hand the camera over to the gorgeous Deborah Moore. Hello, darling. Try not to do too much wobbling like that. So a pattern repeat on the fabric is...
That way.
It does, yes. There you go.
Sorry.
You should be able to see me on the screen.
Yeah.
Now, for people who are larger, you need to go above. Ladies and gentlemen, my very, very amateur performances here. Welcome. So, pattern repeat, what does that mean? So you can see a pattern repeat in a piece of fabric is where the same thing appears right after each other. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be 23 or 24 inches, which is one of the largest pattern repeats you can get. And it is 23 and a half inches is the pattern repeat on this one. And the way you know that is you always put your ruler on and you follow your ruler along until you get the same piece. But it's very, very important when you've got a smaller pattern repeat, that when you follow your finger along, that you're not just getting a half pattern. So for example, when you look at this one, the pattern repeat goes from there to there. But very often what happens is you'll have 2 of these elements, but they won't be a pattern repeat, they'll be part of the pattern. So you may end up having to go all the way along. So I always say, when you're checking a pattern repeat, start there, and you go, there's my first one, there's my second one, those 2 are identical, that is my pattern repeat. Because very often it will happen when you've got a piece of fabric, it isn't a full pattern repeat. And also, just in case I hadn't said this before, you're always following the selvage for your pattern repeat. So on this one, you can see that is a pattern repeat there, but we double check by going over here. So you follow along that line to check that that's your pattern repeat. So that's how you figure out what the pattern repeat is. Many of you would have seen in my first video this quilt. Here's one I prepared earlier. We'll have seen this quilt. So for this, you'll see that my borders are my pattern repeat. So you can see from there to the top there is my pattern repeat. And I think it's always important, whatever quilt you make of a stack and wax, you've always got the original fabric in it, so that you know that these all came from this pattern repeat. It just makes it a little bit more interesting when you're doing your quilt that way. Now the other one to look at is just, I'm giving you a whole load of examples of how you check your pattern repeats. Now these are ones I've already cut out, so you can see my pattern repeat is along here. But when I was measuring this, you've got 2 different trees as you go along. I'm just going to check I don't have any leftover fabric. I think this is a good example actually. Again, you get the selvage edge. You follow along. Now this is a good one because you can see you've got a house, but that's a different house, and you then got the bunny. And then you go along there, there's your bunny. So that's your pattern repeat along there. So what we're looking to do once you've identified your pattern repeat is we're going to cut out 8 of them. Now anybody who has done this before will tell you the first thing you're going to do is where you've got your fabric, you're going to cut along this fold. And the reason being is this is too big and unwieldy to try and use in one piece. So on this one, I can't remember how many pattern repeats you've got. So we're going to count them out. So that's 1, 2, that was 2, that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So you've got exactly 8 pattern repeats on this. So what you do with this, it's very technical. You might want to get a wide shot on this. It's really technical. You dump your fabric on the screen, you get a good pair of fabric scissors. You put your fabric scissors on the fold and you cut. And you can tell I'm being so accurate, it's ridiculous. I put it on the ironing board, I pressed it to an equal point. You just literally cut along that seam, and you're going to go wonky, and it doesn't matter because when you cut these out into your pattern piece sets, this end bit gets cut away anyway and is discarded. So do not be too precious about it. It all comes out in the wash. Now I would advise anybody doing a stack and whack for the first time, do a smaller repeat. You might hate a stack and whack. I always remember I had a lovely lady, Sarah Adams, came and did a class with me for English paper piecing. And my favourite comment from any pupil was she did an English paper piecing class for a small pin cushion, and she said that was the best money I've ever spent because I will never in a million years again do English paper piecing, and I didn't waste a penny because I hate it. I will never do it again, but that's how we learn. So taking that philosophy into action, you make sure you do a small one in case you hate the process.
So I've done it wrong then?
No, you haven't, because I know you're going to love it, and I know you will, and the finishing on these is going to be so beautiful. But as you can tell, you're cutting for ages, and you've got a little bit wonky on your camera technique there. No? Just feedback. As people start going like this. Oh, poop. So you'll see over here, I've gone a little wonky. You're going to do the same. It's fine, because the edge of it is going to get cut away anyway,
yeah.
So don't worry. Be kind to yourself.
Nearly there.
Not really.
Well, on that bit.
On that bit. I do also avoid doing the slide cut technique because then you can very easily make a big mistake very quickly. So I do prefer to clink, 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 clink. You do what works for you, I'm just telling you a thing. Left or right? There is no right answer. Left or right?
Right.
There we go. Now, normally, you try and have one of your lovely ladies around that you love a lot, and what you do, you go, there you go, fold that. Thank you, Irene!
That's nice of him, isn't it, Irene?
I'm so lucky they love me.
Yes, aren't you?
Right, so now we have half of 8 repeats, okay? At this point, we are going to get a rotary cutting mat. Try and get one as big as you can. I'm going to ask Faith, because I know she had a rotary cutter to hand, or I'm going to ask someone with a rotary cutter to hurl one at me. I don't think I can use that.
You got one?
So, the first thing you're going to do on this process is we're going to identify where we're going to start. Now, with a big piece, do you want to get my face in this?
It's all right, yeah.
With a big piece like this, it doesn't really matter where you're going to start cutting because you're going to end up with really big pieces. So it doesn't really matter whether you start your piece there or whether you start it here. It doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
All I would say is when you're doing your left-hand side and your right-hand side, if you want your blocks to be identical, you pick the same line where you're going to start. I never do the same line for every stack and whack, only because you end up with the same blocks, and that's wonderful. But having slightly more interesting blocks by moving it over just by 2 inches, all your blocks are completely different. Because, for example, if I start this one here, you can see I've got this purple in the middle, but if I then have 2 inches further down and do that, the first block's going to be like that, but the second block's going to have a much bigger purple presence in the middle. So it's just a case I always try and do a 2-3 inch difference on a repeat this size. On a smaller repeat, I normally do an inch, inch and a half So for something like this is a really small repeat. So what I would do is I would probably cut my first repeat here, and then my second repeat I would cut here, because then it would just mean that things like this would be different. Does that make sense? Is that making sense to you, Faith? Faith is my test audience in the background there. So what I would do is I'd cut this off as my marking point for everything. That would be my marking point for my left-hand side. But then when I'm doing my right-hand side, my marking point would be here. So when I line the fabric up, I've got a different position to start with. That may make more sense when I demonstrate it. It might make more sense. So we are not going to be fussy on this. We are going to line this up as straight as we dare. And we're going to take a very small... Now, when you cut it, and I'm going to need you to get a little bit closer here if you don't mind. What is really important when you do this is find points along your fabric that are easy to line up. So over here, you could say you're marking the edge of that. And if I line that up there with that arrow there, I'm getting my fabric completely square here. I'm lining that point up here. Then I'm getting this point over here. I'm almost the top of that one. So it just gives you a little bit of marking point as you go along. Now, Deborah, don't move. I'm cutting towards you. Oh, I love Faith's brand new rotary cutter blade there. Thank you, darling. So what this means is you've now got your initial starting point. Okay, so I don't move my fabric at all. All I do is I take this bit and I go and I lay this over here, and you can see I'm lining these points up all the way along so that it's completely lined up along that route. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now, when I do this, and I line my ruler up, I've got my ruler all lined up on that line, so you can see the fabric line is here, and I'm